Welcome to the Theological Lens, where our goal is to see the world, our daily walks, and our worship transformed by the truth of Jesus Christ. Our content is saturated with Scripture, overflowing with faith, and rooted in the good news of the cross. Each episode will proclaim the name of the Lord, calling us to submit to His ways and live lives that glorify Him. With hearts full of thankfulness, we'll explore how Jesus shapes everything, our decisions, our worldview, and our worship, always pointing back to the hope and transformation found in Him.
Welcome to the Theological Lens. My name is Dr. Lynelle Buchanan, and I'm so glad that you have joined me today. To get to where we're going to go today and the next lesson that I've learned in the dark, I need to give you some background on what has happened in my life in the last little bit. A couple of months ago, I had back surgery. They were trying to resolve some compressions that were in my L4, L5 area. And so what they essentially did is they went in and rotor-rooted some nerve openings to give me more room in there and hopefully to alleviate some pain. After the surgery, I had several weeks of some pretty significant restrictions. All of that has left me incredibly weak, especially in my core. So I'm seeing a physical therapist, and she will give me some ridiculously simple exercises, and they will kick my butt. I'm not used to that. In my youth, I was an athlete, and I was strong, and I really like being strong, and I don't like being unable to do simple things. That has been really rough for me. One of the simple things that has been obnoxiously difficult is actually riding in a car. So for this last week, I was teaching at a camp that's about an hour and 15 minutes from here, and I was driving back and forth each day. So every day I was in the car about 2.5 hours. And that was really, really tough for me. It was just unnecessarily difficult on my back. And compounding this is the fact that we have a precious puppy. He's about 7 months old. He's a Bichon Frise and toy poodle mix. And he's just in a stage where if I'm ready to go to bed, it doesn't mean he's ready to go to bed. He might be ready to chase cats around the house. And so there were some nights that ended up being later nights than I wanted to be because I could not get this puppy to settle down and go to sleep. So I ended up just kind of fatigued and in some pain. And on the last day of camp, as James was driving me there, we were talking through some really tough issues and some things that were overwhelming me at the time. And I was struggling, and I turned to him and I asked, "Why is this so hard?" And my husband dropped this little nugget on me, and he said, "I think that you are tired and you are hurting, and that has affected everything." It was not hard for me to see that he was right. I was weary. I was kind of bone weary. And I had been contending with this elevated pain that sapped my normal resources, and even in areas that were absolutely unrelated to that pain, unrelated to my back. And it reminded me of a really important lesson that I have been working on through the whole last year of my life. When we are battling deep pain, like the deep stuff, it is not generally confined to just one area of our life. What happens is those effects tend to bleed into all of the other areas of our life. And that makes things harder than they would normally be. When we have this hurt draining our emotional resources, then it reduces the energy that we have to respond to everything else that comes our way. And that also tends to affect us cognitively. It affects us physically. It affects us emotionally, socially, and it even affects us spiritually. So pain, whether it's a physical pain or it's an emotional pain or a psychological pain, it is an inescapable part of the human experience. All of us have to deal with pain in one way, shape, or another, and not just in one point of our life, but usually across multiple points of our life and lots of different kinds of pain. And this pain can arise from a bunch of different kinds of challenges that come into our life. And it could be financial struggles. It could be relational conflict. It could be health issues. It could be grief. It could be professional setbacks. And its impact, this pain, often extends far beyond the point of origin. It might have started in one place, but sooner or later, it's going to leak into a bunch of other places as well. And when this pain dominates one area of our life, it creates this ripple effect. And that diminishes our capacity to handle other problems effectively. we could more deeply examine some of the areas that are most affected. And one of the most foundational areas that's affected is our very ability to think. Pain in any area of life acts like a cognitive tax, draining mental resources that we rely on to navigate other situations. Psychologists refer to this as the concept of cognitive bandwidth, the finite mental capacity that we have to process information, make decisions, and regulate our emotions. When we're consumed by pain, whether it's the stress of a job loss, relational conflict, health difficulties, whatever it is, our cognitive bandwidth narrows. There's this interesting research by Mullainathan and Shafir. And in 2013, they demonstrated that even something like financial stress can reduce cognitive performance equivalent to losing 13 IQ points. Now, that is a really big swing. This happens because the brain becomes preoccupied with the immediate problems and it leaves fewer resources for other tasks, especially those that require deep thinking or even creative flexibility. Consider somebody who's like struggling with those financial issues that the authors researched. The constant worry about making payments or avoiding collection calls can dominate their mental space, and this preoccupation makes it harder to focus on work. And that can lead to missed deadlines. It can lead to poor performance, and that in turn creates new problems related to finances, and that could mean job insecurity. The pain of that financial stress then is spilling over, reducing the individual's ability to cope with professional responsibilities. Now, similarly, as an RD, I watched girls who were going through like really difficult breakups, and they struggled with basic human functioning. The emotional pain from the breakup made it so difficult for them to concentrate on daily tasks like homework or their jobs. They found it hard to maintain patience with roommates, and all of this amplified the interpersonal conflicts that they were already experiencing. So I remember a girl who felt so devastated by the loss of a relationship that she came to me and she said, "Lynelle, I cannot stay at school." And I was like, "Girl, what are you talking about?" She felt like she needed to drop out because the hurt from this breakup was making it so difficult for her to concentrate on homework, to follow through on her academic responsibilities, to just learn. And if she couldn't be successful academically, she was also struggling socially and even in her job. That pain had now diffused into every area of her life. This illustration of how pain in one area creates a negative cognitive feedback loop where diminished mental clarity exacerbates other challenges, and it further reduces clear thinking and also creates more mental problems. This is a big deal. The effects of dark times are not just cognitive. They're also physiological. Like we already know that chronic stress in one area of life triggers the body's stress response. And that means it's going to release hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And where those hormones are so useful in the short term for survival, we know that prolonged exposure to those hormones can lead to physical exhaustion. And somebody dealing with chronic health issues, especially chronic pain, may experience fatigue and irritability and reduced immune function. These physical symptoms make it so much harder to cope with unrelated problems like managing household responsibilities or resolving workplace conflicts or just getting out of bed and taking a shower. The physiological toll also affects emotional regulation. And studies show that chronic stress impairs this prefrontal cortex. And that is this brain region where our important impulse control and decision making, the executive functioning, that's where all of that takes place. And so that impairment is going to bleed into every area of our life. And somebody overwhelmed by something like a toxic work environment may struggle to remain patient with their children, or they may struggle to make thoughtful, wise financial decisions. You know, the pain in one domain, work, physically alters the body's ability to cope with other decisions. It creates this domino effect that can absolutely be devastating in our lives and just gets bigger and bigger and more and more and more overwhelming. Sleep disruption, which is a common consequence of stress, further compounds this issue. And sleep deprivation is very much devastating to us from a cognitive and physiological kind of way. Somebody losing sleep over a family dispute, may find it so much harder to concentrate at work, or they might make more and more mistakes based on that stress. See, our bodies have an interconnected system, and that pain in one area rarely stays confined to that one area. And beyond these cognitive and physiological impacts, the emotional and social toll is, I'm going to do that again. And beyond those cognitive and those physiological impacts, the emotional and social toll is absolutely no joke. Emotionally, pain in one area can absolutely deplete the resiliency that we need to face these other challenges. Emotional pain, such as grief or feelings of rejection, often lead to feelings of hopelessness, low self-efficacy, and that might reduce our motivation to tackle absolutely unrelated problems. Somebody grieving the loss of a loved one may lack the emotional energy to care for basic physiological needs, or especially to maintain social connectedness, even though that very social connectedness might be something that helps them deal with the loss better. Their coping with the loss is by isolation, and that isolation is more devastating. The withdrawal further limits their access to those support systems that might help. Socially, pain in one area can strain relationships. It creates new problems and new relationships. A person consumed by work-related stress might snap at their partner, sparking arguments that add to the relational pain and their burden. These new conflicts further drain emotional resources, making it harder to address whatever the original issue once was. We see this cycle in marital relationships where a marriage that is highly conflicted then might lead to isolation and withdrawal because they're avoiding the arguments. But in that isolation and withdrawal, it creates new problems within the relationship, and there's no hope and there's no ability to reconnect and fix the original issues. So all of that emotional toll just from one area is now making bigger and bigger issues within the relationship. You know, the other part of the socio-emotional problem that we have when we're dealing with pain is an effect that I refer to as stepping on a bruise. That phrase comes from a situation in our family that actually occurred during the pandemic. Now, I am not trying to give you flashbacks, but you remember when they locked down the entire world? That was not a fun time. And we had to figure out how we were going to handle church for the congregation that my husband was pastoring. And so there was another family that was heavily involved in the praise team, and we got together with them every Saturday night, and we would record the entire service. The songs, the announcements, James would do his message, and then he would edit it and release it so that on Sunday morning, the people of the church could watch a service as it was from the safety of their own homes where we were, quarantining to stop the spread. And the nice thing about this is we got some connection with that other family, but it was also, I think it was really good for our kids. They got to interact with each other. They had been friends for most of their lives. And so they got some connection with other children while their parents were recording these services. And that other family, we also ended up getting together a few times to go to the park and play some soccer. So let's get some fresh air, and then we'll go connect with this other family. And they had 3 kids. We had 3 kids. And so we could put together a reasonable soccer game. It was a lot of fun. Their youngest of their 3 was 8 years old. My oldest was 17 years old. And we just had a bunch of kids right in the middle of that. And here we are out on the soccer field, just getting some energy out and connecting with each other. That youngest kiddo was a riot as he played with us. He had lots and lots of energy, but he didn't have a lot of skill, so he often stepped on our toes. But he weighed next to nothing, so it wasn't a big deal. At least it wasn't until the middle of that summer. See, my oldest son had gone and he had been swimming in a natural pool. And while he was in there, this really big rock had fallen on top of his foot, and it had given him a really, really deep bruise. So the next time that we got together to play soccer with that other family and that little guy stepped on his foot, what usually would have been no big deal was actually excruciating for my kid. What had changed wasn't the stimulus. It wasn't this kiddo stepping on the foot. What had changed was the fact that Matt now had this bruise, and any weight whatsoever that was put on top of that bruise caused him a lot of pain. His capacity to handle having his foot stepped on had changed drastically. And I think very often that when we are bruised, we are so much more easily hurt. by things that normally wouldn't hurt us. They usually wouldn't be a very big deal. And as a broader recognition of this potential, our American feminist culture came up with this little thing called a trigger warning. They were originally intended to be advanced indications of difficult topics. If those were going to be discussed, they wanted to kind of warn people that, hey, this is a tough topic and it might upset you. And for those who were bruised, maybe this was some fair warning. There are some good reasons for those kinds of warnings, but also there's some valid criticisms as well. They can certainly undermine resilience. They can put a damper on free discussion, and they give those with bruises the indication that they'll never get over it, that they'll always have to be protected from those kinds of topics. I don't think that's a really good message. The other problem with that is that they're really subjective, and two people who have experienced the exact same thing might not respond the same way to those topics. So if you think you're warning somebody, it's not necessarily going to affect them the same way. So that subjectivity makes it harder to navigate as well. Listen, I do not believe that it is helpful to create expectations that no one will ever bump into our hurts. It's not fair to blame other people who are just living their lives for the fact that we might be sensitive sometimes. Certainly, no one should intentionally stomp on our most sensitive parts. But we can't expect other people to know and anticipate all of our reactions. One more category of resource that could be lessened when we are in pain is our spiritual reserves. And it is not uncommon when people walk through hard roads to start to feel disconnected from the Lord. It doesn't have to be that way, but it often is. Sometimes we choose unproductive responses to the fact that we are going through pain. And sometimes that can leave us feeling pretty spiritually empty. So some people pull away from church because they just can't seem to be in that environment when they're hurting. Or some will stop praying, maybe because they're afraid that the pain that they would express to the Lord is something that is fully blasphemous. Some might reflect that anger back to the Lord, and it could even serve as a catalyst for deconstructing their faith. I have found that when I have turned to the Lord with open expression of my loss, my frustration, my emptiness, my doubt, my worry, my hopelessness, my confusion, then what I have felt is welcomed by my Father. I've been able to worship differently and probably more deeply than I have before. I've connected with Him and more honestly. And I have felt seen and I have felt heard by my God. I'm drawn closer out of desperation. I've always appreciated the 23rd Psalm. This beautiful song speaks of our relationship with the Lord as an analogy of a shepherd and his sheep. There were always parts of it that I understood, and there were some parts that I am really just beginning to understand better now. The Psalm says this. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes, or depending on your version, he restores my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemy. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." In the beginning of this chapter, David says that God makes us lie down in green pastures and he leads us beside quiet waters. I understood these analogies to be about God's provision and protection of us, giving us food and safe rest. In the same way, quiet waters were important because if the water was deep, it was very dangerous for a sheep, because the sheep, when they were covered with wool, they stepped into fast-moving water. Their wool could absorb all of that water, and then they could stumble and drown. It was really easy for that to happen. So the fact that God would lead us beside quiet waters where we're safe, even when we're burdened, that's a beautiful thing. But it's that next phrase that I'm really just beginning to wrap my head around. It says he restores or refreshes my soul. Hard paths and dark days can absolutely empty our souls of joy and of peace. But our good shepherd can restore us. He can help us find the rest that reestablishes those resources again. Joy can come again. Bruises can heal. In time, we can rebuild the strength that we once had. Cognitive strength, physical strength, emotional strength, spiritual strength, all of that can come again. And when we are well again, then we won't be as vulnerable to new pain or circumstances that tend to bump our bruises. So I think in all of this, there are three main takeaways that I want to leave you with today. The first is that when we are hurting, we need to recognize that we have depleted resources. It's just important for us to realize that. We might not read situations really well. We might find things that are otherwise innocuous to be absolutely horrible and the end of the world. We might overreact to smaller stimulus because our ability to cope is actually lessened by what we're experiencing. We might find normal functioning to be incredibly hard. If we can remain aware of those things, then it might help us to moderate our responses. Maybe the people around us aren't the problem. Maybe our fatigue and our pain is the problem. Additionally, since we don't have the same capacities when we are struggling, we probably need to cut ourselves some slack. This is why I appreciate that truth that is in Hebrews chapter 12. The verse says this. It says, "Make level paths for your feet so that the lame may be healed." And what the author is reminding us is that when we have a weakness, we need to be really careful about the paths we choose. If we choose the hard paths when we are already a little disabled, then we're going to end up exacerbating that injury. Healing is going to take longer. So when we know we are wounded, we need to choose those level paths and give ourselves the best ability to be able to do better. So cut yourself some slack, maybe slow down on some other things when you know that some sort of pain is pulling at the resources that you have to give. The second principle that I think we can draw out of all of this is that in God's grace, healing does come in time. That great philosopher, Michael Bolton, said, "Nothing heals a broken heart like time, love, and tenderness." Well, he was right, but he was also wrong. He didn't get the fullness of the picture. But he was right that time is a variable that heals. And sometimes when we're going through darkness, we need to recognize that it won't last forever, that there are brighter days that are coming. And if we will just hold on in those dark places when we can't see any light around us, we might begin to recognize that our God is there with us and he is holding us and he is guiding us and he is bringing about that restoration of our souls. We just have to give it some time. And the third principle that I think is really valuable in the middle of this is a good reminder for us that the people around us are often walking around with some pretty deep bruises. We might not be able to see them. We might not know where they are, and we certainly might not know how painful they are ahead of time. But they're there nonetheless. And if we become aware of that, then I think it should prompt us to offer more kindness and more patience and more grace. That's what we should be pouring out when we recognize that those around us are just going through a tough time or they're getting better in that tough time, but there's still some lingering. Can be gentle with one another. And in that way, we can support the healing that others need. Listen, I know that some of you out there who are listening today are probably walking some pretty dark paths. Some of you are starting to find relief from the urgent aspects of the pain, but those bruises are still lingering. Look to your shepherd and find hope and encouragement that while healing takes time, we serve a God who can create beauty out of ashes. He can give us the oil of joy instead of mourning. Let us wear a garment of praise instead of a spirit of heaviness. Because when this God steps into these moments in our life, he creates in us oaks of righteousness that he has planted. And then he is the one that is glorified. And that would be the best outcome of all. So thank you for joining me today. If this was a blessing to you, would you please like, subscribe, share it with others? We really want God to be able to use this whatever way he wants. And I look forward to seeing you next time on The Theological Lens.
If you enjoyed what you just heard, we invite you to like the episode and, if possible, leave a positive review. If you know someone who could benefit from this content, please share it on your social media. We also ask that you subscribe and follow so that you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. We are so glad that you chose to be with us today. We hope that you will join us again next week on The Theological Lens.